The sterile silence of the courtroom is a weapon. It amplifies every whisper, every rustle of paper, every beat of a terrified heart. For Jessica Sterling, that silence was the sound of her world collapsing. Across the room, her husband, Robert, the man who once promised to cherish her forever, leaned into the microphone. His voice, smooth and practiced, delivered the killing blow. "She is a danger to our daughter. She is mentally unfit to raise my baby." The words hung in the air, a poison cloud designed to choke her. But they didn't know her secret. They didn't know about the one person who knew the entire truth, the one person whose testimony could shatter Robert's perfect facade, and that person was about to take the stand. The Honorable Judge Morrison peered down from his elevated perch, his face a mask of judicial neutrality that felt to Jessica Sterling like utter condemnation. Courtroom 4B was decorated in the traditional style of solemn importance, dark wood paneling, flags standing stiffly at attention, and an air of stale recycled oxygen. It was a room designed to make ordinary people feel small, and on this sweltering July afternoon, Jessica felt microscopic. Across from her at the petitioner's table sat Robert. He was the very picture of concerned sorrow. His expensive charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his jaw was set in a look of grim but necessary resolve. He was performing, and Jessica knew he was playing the role of his life, the grieving husband forced to make an impossible choice to protect his child. To anyone else in the room, the bailiff, the court reporter, the stern-faced judge, he was credible. He was convincing. To Jessica, he was a monster wearing the face of the man she had married. His lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Alistair Davenport, was on his feet, his voice resonating with practiced gravitas. "Your Honor," he began, "we are not here today to cast aspersions or to malign Mrs. Sterling. We are here for one reason and one reason only: the safety and well-being of a 9-month-old infant, Lily Sterling." Davenport gestured toward Robert, a tableau of paternal anguish. "My client, Mr. Robert Sterling, comes before this court with the heaviest of hearts. He is here to present evidence that his wife, Jessica Sterling, due to a severe and untreated mental decline following the birth of their daughter, represents a clear and present danger to the child she claims to love." Jessica's own lawyer, Catherine Croft, a sharp woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, placed a restraining hand on her arm. Jessica hadn't realized she was trembling. A fine, violent shudder that started in her core and radiated outwards. "Breathe, Jessica," Catherine whispered, her voice a low anchor in the swirling chaos. "This is what they do. It's a script. Don't let him see it affects you." But it was affecting her. Every word was a physical blow. She risked a glance at Robert, and for a fleeting moment his eyes met hers. There was no sadness there, no regret. There was only a cold, triumphant glint. It was the look of a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. "We will present evidence," Davenport continued, his voice rising, "of Mrs. Sterling's increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior. We will hear testimony about her obsessive-compulsive episodes, her crippling anxiety that leaves her unable to perform basic maternal tasks, and most disturbingly, her verbalized fears of harming the baby." A gasp rippled through the small gallery, which was sparsely populated with a few court watchers and a severe-looking woman Jessica vaguely recognized as Robert's distant aunt. The words, "fears of harming the baby," landed like a physical strike. He was twisting it. He was taking the most vulnerable, terrifying thoughts of a new mother struggling with postpartum anxiety and weaponizing them into an accusation of premeditated malice. Catherine scribbled furiously on her legal pad. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. She remembered that night about 3 months ago. Lily had a slight fever, her first one. Jessica had been awake for nearly 48 hours, consumed with a primal terror that Lily would stop breathing. Exhausted and delirious, she had dissolved into tears in Robert's arms in the kitchen at 3 a.m. "I'm so scared, Rob," she had sobbed, her body racked with exhaustion. "My mind keeps showing me the worst things. What if I fall asleep holding her and drop her? What if the fever gets worse and I don't notice my brain is screaming at me that I'm going to fail her, that I'm going to hurt her by being a bad mother? He had held her then, stroking her hair. Shh, Jess, it's okay. You're just tired. You'd never hurt her. You're a wonderful mother. His voice had been a balm, a soothing lie that she had desperately wanted to believe. Now, in the cold, sterile light of the courtroom, she saw that moment for what it was. Not comfort, but ammunition gathering. He wasn't soothing her. He was taking notes. "Call Robert Sterling to the stand," Davenport announced. Robert moved with a practiced grace, was sworn in and settled into the witness box. He looked directly at the judge, his expression a perfect blend of respect and distress. "Mr. Sterling," Davenport began, his tone gentle, "could you please describe for the court the changes you observed in your wife's behavior after the birth of your daughter Lily?" Robert sighed, a theatrical exhalation of pain. "It started subtly. At first I thought it was just the baby blues. Everyone warned us about that. But it escalated. Jessica became obsessive." "Obsessive in what way?" "Cleanliness, for one. She would sterilize Lily's bottles 10, sometimes 15 times a day. If a pacifier dropped on the floor, she wouldn't just wash it. She would boil it for an hour and then throw it away, convinced it was contaminated. Our credit card bills skyrocketed from her buying new baby supplies every other day because she deemed the old ones irrevocably tainted." This was true, but stripped of all context. The context was her crippling fear of Lily getting sick, a fear amplified by hormones and sleep deprivation. She had been trying to protect her. She would check on Lily's breathing constantly. Robert continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Not just once or twice a night. I'm talking every 5 minutes. She would put her hand on her chest, a mirror under her nose. A few times I woke up to find her with her ear pressed so hard against Lily's mouth that I was afraid she would suffocate her. When I tried to stop her, she became hysterical, screaming that I was trying to kill our baby by being negligent." The lie was so audacious, so close to a sliver of truth, that it was breathtaking. She had been checking Lily's breathing. She had been terrified. But the accusation that he'd feared she would suffocate her, that was pure malicious fiction. He had been the one to sleep soundly through the night while she patrolled the nursery like a ghost, her heart pounding with a mixture of profound love and unspeakable dread. "Did she ever verbalize any thoughts about harming Lily?" Davenport asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Robert paused. He squeezed his eyes shut as if recalling the memory was torturous. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "One night, she came to me completely distraught. She said her brain was telling her to hurt Lily, that she was afraid she was going to fail as a mother and end up hurting her." He looked at Jessica, then his eyes pleading, as if begging her to understand why he had to do this. The performance was masterful. He was painting a picture of a man who had been pushed to the brink, a man who loved his unstable wife but loved his child more. Jessica felt the room spin. He had taken her most private confession, the raw, unfiltered terror of postpartum anxiety, and polished it into a weapon. He had taken her cry for help and presented it to the court as a confession of intent. Davenport walked back to his table. "Your Honor, we are not asking for Mrs. Sterling to be punished. We are asking for her to get help. And while she does, we are asking that Mr. Sterling be granted sole custody of their daughter to ensure Lily is raised in a safe, stable, and loving environment. We believe Mrs. Sterling's own words demonstrate that she is at this present time mentally unfit to provide that." Catherine's hand tightened on Jessica's arm again. "Don't react," she mouthed. But Jessica couldn't help it. A single hot tear escaped and traced a burning path down her cheek. She wasn't just losing her daughter. She was losing her sanity, her past, her very identity, all being methodically rewritten by the man who had promised to be her partner in all things. She thought of Lily, her gummy smile, the way her tiny fingers would curl around Jessica's thumb, the smell of her hair after a bath. An overwhelming, ferocious wave of love and rage washed over her. Robert could have his performance. He could have his lies and his tailored suit. She wouldn't let him have her daughter. As Davenport concluded, a memory surfaced in Jessica's mind, unbidden and sharp. It was from their honeymoon in Santorini. They were sitting on a balcony overlooking the caldera, a bottle of wine between them. Robert had turned to her, his eyes sincere. "I never knew what true happiness was until I met you, Jess," he'd said. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're safe and happy." Safe and happy. The words echoed in the cold courtroom, a bitter, mocking phantom of a promise that had been replaced by the most profound betrayal she could ever imagine. The battle had been joined, and she was already bleeding. The gavel fell, signaling a recess for lunch, and the oppressive tension in courtroom 4B momentarily dissipated. Robert was immediately surrounded by his lawyer and his aunt, who patted his shoulder with a sympathetic frown. He didn't look at Jessica. It was part of the act, the pained husband who couldn't bear to look upon the source of his sorrow. Catherine guided a shell-shocked Jessica into a small, windowless conference room. "Okay," Catherine said, her tone all business as she snapped the lid off her pen. "That was ugly, but it was exactly what we expected. Davenport is a showman and Robert is a convincing liar." "He twisted everything, Catherine," Jessica whispered, her voice hoarse. "He made me sound like a monster." "He made you sound like a woman suffering from severe unmanaged postpartum anxiety, and he's using the textbook symptoms to frame you as unstable. It's a classic brutal tactic. Our job now is to provide the context he so conveniently omitted." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes locked on Jessica's. "We need to talk about the beginning. Not just after Lily was born, but the months leading up to it. What was your marriage like? Was he always this manipulative?" Jessica sank into a chair, the question sending her spiraling back. Was he the insidious nature of emotional abuse? Is that it rarely starts with a bang. It begins with 1,000 tiny cuts so small you barely notice them until you're bleeding out. Before Lily, their life had seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Robert was a successful investment banker, charming and ambitious. He showered her with gifts, took her to exclusive restaurants, and curated a life that was the envy of their friends. Their sprawling suburban home with its manicured lawn and minimalist interior felt less like a home and more like a stage set for Robert's success. The first cracks appeared during her pregnancy. Robert had been thrilled, but his excitement was proprietary. It was his baby, his heir. Her morning sickness was an inconvenience to their social schedule. Her exhaustion was a bit dramatic. He'd hired an interior designer for the nursery, choosing a palette of muted grays and beige. When Jessica had wistfully mentioned wanting a splash of sunny yellow, Robert had smiled indulgently. "Darling, let's stick to what's sophisticated. We don't want it looking like a circus." He managed their finances, their social life, even her wardrobe, subtly steering her towards brands and styles that reflected well on him. It was all done under the guise of taking care of her. He was insulating her, she realized now, not protecting her. He was creating a gilded cage where he was the sole gatekeeper. The birth itself had been difficult. A long labor followed by an emergency C-section left Jessica feeling battered, disconnected from her own body. The rush of love for Lily was immediate and overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a terrifying shadow anxiety. It started as a low hum and quickly escalated into a screaming siren in her mind. Every news story about a sick child, every stray comment about SIDS became a direct threat. She tried to talk to Robert. In the early weeks, he was performatively supportive. He would bring her tea, tell her she was doing a great job, and then immediately text his friends about how hormonal and emotional she was. She once saw a message he'd sent to his brother, "Jessica is a wreck. Good thing I'm here to keep things stable. Parenthood is not for the weak." As the weeks turned into months, his patience wore thin. Her meticulous cleaning, born of a desperate need to control something in a world that felt terrifyingly out of control, became a source of ridicule. "For God's sake, Jessica," he'd snapped one evening, finding her on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor for the third time that day. Are you trying to erase the finish? Our cleaning lady was here yesterday. This is insane. I worry about germs, she'd stammered. Lily is a baby, not a surgical patient. You need to get a grip. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. It was the voice of a man burdened by a defective wife. The turning point was her decision to seek professional help. The intrusive thoughts, the flashes of horrible accidental things happening to Lily had become unbearable. She knew deep down they weren't desires. They were fears. Terrified of her own mind, she researched therapists and found Dr. Ann Holloway, a psychiatrist, specializing in perinatal mood disorders. When she told Robert, his reaction was chilling. A psychiatrist? He'd laughed a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. Are you serious? Jessica, you don't need a shrink. You need to sleep and maybe get out of the house. What are people going to think? What am I supposed to tell my partners? That my wife is seeing a psychiatrist because she can't handle being a mother? It's not about what people think, Robert. It's about me feeling better so I can be a better mother for Lily, she pleaded. Dr. Holloway says it's classic postpartum OCD and anxiety. It's treatable. So now you have a label, he sneered. Wonderful. Just another excuse. Do you know how this will look if we ever, He trailed off, but the threat was clear. If we ever split up. If we ever go to court. The seed of his plan was already there. He was already thinking about custody, about how to use her cry for help against her. Now. Catherine's voice pulled her back to the grim conference room. Tell me about Dr. Holloway. How many sessions did you have? What did you discuss? I've been seeing her weekly for about 4 months, Jessica said. We talked about everything. My fears, the intrusive thoughts, my relationship with Robert. She gave me coping mechanisms, grounding techniques. She helped me understand that the thoughts weren't me, they were the anxiety. She was the first person who made me feel sane, not broken. And Robert knew you were going. Yes, he hated it. He called it my hour of complaining. He would make passive-aggressive comments before I left like, have fun telling a stranger all our family secrets. He started keeping a log, I think. Every time I had a bad day, every time I was anxious or weepy, he would make a note of it on his phone. I thought it was strange, but now I know he was building his case. Catherine nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on her face. He wasn't just gaslighting you, Jessica. He was documenting it. He was creating a narrative from day one. What about staff? Did you have a nanny? Jessica's heart clenched. Yes, a wonderful woman named Maria. She was with us 3 days a week. She saw everything. Where is she now? Robert fired her a month ago. Jessica said, the memory stinging. He claimed she was overstepping and coddling my anxieties. The truth is, Maria was kind to me. She would tell me I was a good mother. She saw how I was with Lily. Robert couldn't have a witness who saw the truth. Catherine's eyes lit up with a spark of strategic fire. Find her, Jessica. Get me a number and address, anything. A third-party witness who saw the dynamic in that house could be invaluable. Davenport can paint you as an unreliable narrator. It's much harder to discredit a nanny who has no dog in this fight. Jessica felt a flicker of hope, the first she'd felt all day. Maria. Of course. Maria had seen Robert's dismissiveness, his subtle cruelty. She had seen Jessica's patient, loving care for Lily even on the hardest days. The door to the conference room opened and the bailiff stuck his head in. Court will be back in session in 5 minutes. As they gathered their things to head back into the fray, Catherine put a hand on Jessica's shoulder. Jessica, what Robert did on that stand was vile. He took your most vulnerable moments and put them on display. Now we have to do the same thing, but with the truth. We have to show the judge the architecture of his lie brick by painful brick. It won't be easy. You'll have to talk about all of it. The anxiety, the thoughts, your sessions with Dr. Holloway. But this time we control the narrative. Are you ready? Jessica took a deep breath, picturing Lily's face. She thought of the life Robert envisioned for their daughter, a life with a father who could lie so profoundly, and a mother who was reduced to a bi-weekly supervised visit. The thought was unbearable. It was more frightening than any intrusive thought her anxiety had ever conjured. "Yes," Jessica said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "I'm ready." The afternoon session began with Alistair Davenport calling a series of witnesses designed to methodically dismantle Jessica's character. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a death by 1,000 cuts delivered under the guise of concerned testimony. First came their neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a retiree with a penchant for gossip and a prize-winning rose garden. Robert had always made a point of charming her, bringing her garbage bins up the driveway, complimenting her hydrangeas. "Mrs. Gable," Davenport began with avuncular warmth, "you live next door to the Sterlings. Have you had occasion to observe Mrs. Sterling's behavior over the past several months?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Gable said, leaning into the microphone as if sharing a secret. "Poor dear, she seems so stressed. Always looks a fright, you know. Not put together like she used to be. And the crying. I'd be out watering my petunias, and I could hear wailing from the house. Not the baby, mind you. A grown woman's sobs. It was very unsettling." "Did you ever see her with the baby?" "A few times in the yard. She seemed frantic, always checking the blanket, adjusting the sunshade on the stroller. She looked like she was afraid the sky might fall on the poor child. Not like a natural mother, if you take my meaning. More like a frightened babysitter." Catherine's cross-examination was brief and pointed. "Mrs. Gable," she asked, "how many new mothers do you know who are perfectly coiffed and emotionally placid in the first few months after giving birth?" "Well, Mrs. Gable sputtered. "And you testified you heard crying. Could it have been the sound of an exhausted, overwhelmed new mother? Or are you suggesting it was something more sinister?" "I'm just saying what I heard," the woman said defensively. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. Nothing further." It was a small point, but it was a start. Next, Davenport called Peter Finch, a man who had once been a mutual friend, but had firmly sided with Robert after the split. Peter was a colleague of Robert's at the bank, and his loyalty was clear. He testified about a dinner party a few months prior. "Jessica was completely withdrawn," Peter said, shaking his head sadly. "She barely spoke a word. When my wife asked to hold Lily, Jessica physically recoiled. She made some excuse about it being too close to Lily's nap time. It was incredibly awkward. She was hoarding the baby almost. It felt possessive and strange." Jessica remembered that night. It was the first time they'd had people over since Lily was born. The noise, the people, the germs it had sent her anxiety into overdrive. She had been terrified that one of their guests who had mentioned having a cold the week before would get Lily sick. Her refusal to pass the baby around wasn't possessiveness. It was fear. But Peter and Robert were framing it as another symptom of her instability. The worst part of the day, however, was Jessica's own turn on the stand. Catherine led her through her story first, gently allowing her to provide the context for her anxiety, her decision to seek therapy, her love for Lily. Jessica spoke as calmly as she could, explaining the difference between the terrifying, intrusive thoughts and any actual desire to harm her child. "The thoughts were about things I was afraid might happen," she explained to the judge, her voice steady. "They were my anxiety manifesting as worst-case scenarios. Dr. Holloway helped me understand that. Loving my daughter so much is precisely why the thoughts were so scary." She felt a glimmer of hope that she was being understood. But then Alistair Davenport rose for his cross-examination, and the glimmer was extinguished. He approached her not with a roar, but with a look of deep, sorrowful pity that was far more unnerving. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice soft, "you've painted a very sympathetic picture of your struggles. But let's be clear about a few things. You have been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, correct? A perinatal manifestation of it, yes. And anxiety, a severe form according to your husband's testimony. Postpartum anxiety, yes. And you have admitted on this stand to having thoughts about your baby being harmed. Thoughts about her being harmed, yes. Not thoughts of me harming her. Jessica clarified, her heart rate quickening. A fine distinction, perhaps, for a psychiatrist. But for a layman, for a concerned father, the phrase, "I'm afraid I'm going to hurt the baby," sounds like a rather direct alarm bell, wouldn't you agree? That's a twisting of my words. Is it? Davenport took a step closer. Let's talk about your therapist, Dr. Holloway. You pay her for her time, do you not? I pay for her medical services, yes. So she is, in essence, a paid employee. Her job is to support you, to validate your feelings. Is it not possible, Mrs. Sterling, that she is simply telling you what you want to hear? She is a licensed medical professional. Jessica countered, her voice rising. She is not my friend. She is my doctor. A doctor whose notes we have subpoenaed. Davenport walked back to his table and picked up a file. He donned a pair of reading glasses with theatrical slowness. I'm looking at Dr. Holloway's intake notes from your first session. In it, she quotes you as saying, "I feel like a failure. Robert is so perfect and has it all together, and I'm a mess. I'm ruining his life, and I'm going to ruin my daughter's." He looked up. Did you say that, Mrs. Sterling? Jessica's blood ran cold. He had the notes. Her most private, raw feelings now evidence against her. I was in a state of distress. It's how I felt at that moment. So you admit to feeling like a failure, that you were ruining your daughter's life. I felt that way because of the anxiety. It wasn't the truth. Let's look at another note. Davenport pressed on, ignoring her. Session 4. You describe an incident where you dropped a spoonful of baby food on the floor. You state that you then threw out the entire jar, the spoon and the bowl, and bleached the area of the floor for 30 minutes. Is that an accurate account of your behavior? Yes, but... Yes or no, Mrs. Sterling? Did you do that? Yes, she whispered. And does that sound like the behavior of a stable, rational caregiver to you? It's a symptom of a disease that makes you behave in an unstable, irrational manner. Davenport finished for her, his voice like steel. Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. Your words and your actions speak for themselves. He sat down, leaving Jessica exposed and trembling on the stand. He had successfully crucified her character, using her own pain as the nails. She looked at Judge Morrison, whose face was unreadable, and then at Robert, who was looking down at his hands, the very picture of manufactured grief. He had done this. He had laid the trap, and she had walked right into it, dragging her own private hell into the public record as evidence of her unfitness. Later that evening, in her sterile hotel room, Jessica finally connected with the nanny, Maria. Her relief at hearing the woman's warm, familiar voice was so immense she burst into tears. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling," Maria said, her voice full of genuine concern. "I heard what was happening. Mr. Sterling called me. He told me not to speak with you, that you were very unwell." "He's lying, Maria. He's trying to take Lily from me by making me sound crazy." There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Sterling," Maria said, her voice dropping lower, "he is not a good man. The way he spoke to you when he thought I wasn't listening, the way he would roll his eyes after you left the room, I never liked it. He told me once, 'Just handle the baby, I'll handle my wife.' He saw you as a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved." Hope, fierce and desperate, surged in Jessica's chest. "Maria, would you be willing to testify to that, to tell the court what you saw in our home?" There was a longer pause. Jessica could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. She knew it was a huge ask. Robert was a powerful, wealthy man. Maria was a nanny who needed to work. "He fired me with no severance because I told him he should be kinder to you," Maria said, her voice hardening with resolve. "He tried to threaten me, telling me he'd make sure I didn't get a good reference. For you, Mrs. Sterling, and for that sweet baby, Lily, yes, I will come to court. I will tell them the truth." Jessica wept again, but this time the tears weren't of despair. They were tears of gratitude. The tide hadn't turned yet, but for the first time she could see a light in the distance. Her final witness, Dr. Anne Holloway, was scheduled to testify the next day. Everything rested on her and Maria, the professional and the domestic, the two women who had seen behind Robert Sterling's carefully constructed mask. The next morning the courtroom felt different. The air was thick with anticipation. Robert and his lawyer seemed confident, almost smug. They had successfully painted Jessica as an unstable, hysterical woman on the verge of a breakdown. They believed they had won. The defense calls Dr. Anne Holloway to the stand. Catherine Croft announced, her voice clear and steady. A collective murmur went through the room. This was the psychiatrist, the paid employee Davenport had tried to discredit. Dr. Holloway was a woman in her 50s with kind, intelligent eyes and an air of unshakable professionalism. She moved with a calm that seemed to instantly lower the temperature in the room. As she was sworn in, she didn't glance at Jessica, keeping her focus entirely on the proceedings. Catherine began her direct examination. "Dr. Holloway, could you please state your credentials for the court?" Dr. Holloway did so, listing her medical degree from Johns Hopkins, her residency in psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, and her fellowship and specialization in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. She had published papers, taught at a university level, and had been in clinical practice for over 20 years. By the time she finished, the term paid employee seemed utterly ridiculous. "Thank you, doctor," Catherine said. "You were treating Jessica Sterling for approximately 4 months. What was your diagnosis?" "My patient, Mrs. Sterling, presented with classic and significant symptoms of postpartum anxiety with a strong comorbidity of obsessive-compulsive disorder." Dr. Holloway stated, her tone educational and direct. "Mr. Davenport and Mr. Sterling have used terms like unstable, erratic, and paranoid to describe Mrs. Sterling. In your professional opinion, are these accurate medical descriptions?" "No, they are not," Dr. Holloway said firmly. "They are judgmental labels for what are in fact textbook symptoms of a well-documented and treatable medical condition. A condition that affects to varying degrees as many as 1 in 5 new mothers." "Let's address some of these symptoms directly," Catherine said, pacing slowly before the witness box. "We've heard testimony that Mrs. Sterling would obsessively check her baby's breathing. How would you interpret that behavior from a clinical standpoint?" "I would interpret it as a manifestation of hypervigilance, which is a hallmark of postpartum anxiety," Dr. Holloway explained. "The maternal brain is wired for protection. In a mother with PPA, that protective instinct is dialed up to an extreme level. She isn't checking because she wants to harm the baby. She's checking because she has an overwhelming irrational fear that harm will befall the baby. It is an act of perceived protection, not aggression." And the obsessive cleaning. Again, classic OCD. When the world feels terrifyingly out of control and your mind is filled with intrusive fears, you seek to control your immediate environment. Cleaning, sterilizing, organizing. These are common coping mechanisms. They are an attempt to create external order to soothe internal chaos. Catherine paused, letting the words sink in. "Doctor, the most damning accusation we've heard is that Mrs. Sterling verbalized fears of hurting the baby. Mr. Sterling testified this was a major factor in his decision to seek sole custody. Can you shed some light on this phenomenon?" This was the moment. The entire case hinged on it. Dr. Holloway looked directly at Judge Morrison. "Your Honor, this is perhaps the most misunderstood and most tragically weaponized symptom of a perinatal mood disorder. They are called intrusive thoughts. They are unwanted ego-dystonic, meaning they are in direct opposition to the person's true feelings and values, and they often take the form of the mother's worst fears. A mother who is terrified of her baby getting sick will have intrusive thoughts about germs. A mother terrified of accidents will have intrusive thoughts about dropping the baby." She continued, her voice filled with a powerful empathy. "When Jessica came to me and confessed these thoughts, she was weeping. She was horrified by them. That horror is the key diagnostic clue. It showed that these thoughts were alien to her true self. A person who truly wishes to harm their child does not typically react with shame and terror to their own thoughts. In my professional opinion, Jessica's confession was not a threat. It was a cry for help. It was, in fact, a profound act of responsible mothering. She recognized a frightening symptom and sought medical intervention to ensure she remained a safe and healthy caregiver for her child. A silence fell over the courtroom. In a few clear clinical sentences, Dr. Holloway had completely reframed the narrative. She had transformed what Robert had painted as weakness and danger into an act of strength and responsibility. Catherine Croft let the silence hang for a moment before saying, "Nothing further, Your Honor." Alistair Davenport rose, a slight sneer on his face. He knew he had to discredit her. "Dr. Holloway," he began, "you've presented a very neat and tidy explanation. But you are you not an advocate for your patient?" "I am an advocate for my patient's health, yes." "And would a patient's health be improved by having her child taken from her?" "Generally not, no. In fact, studies show that forced separation can be catastrophic for a mother suffering from a perinatal mood disorder." "How convenient," Davenport said. "So your professional opinion just so happens to align perfectly with what your patient needs to win this case." "My professional opinion is based on 2 decades of clinical experience and established medical science. It has nothing to do with the legal outcome and everything to do with an accurate diagnosis of her condition." Davenport circled like a shark. "You mentioned that external factors can impact PPA. What sort of factors?" "A traumatic birth, hormonal shifts, sleep deprivation, a history of anxiety," Dr. Holloway listed. "And very significantly, the level of spousal and social support." "And did Mrs. Sterling feel she had a lack of support?" "I cannot discuss the specifics of our sessions without my patient's consent." Catherine stood. "Your Honor, the defense is happy to waive confidentiality on this topic." Jessica nodded, her heart pounding. Davenport seemed pleased, thinking he had found an opening. "Excellent. So, Dr. Holloway, did Jessica complain to you about her husband, Robert Sterling?" "We discussed her feelings about her marital relationship." "Yes," Dr. Holloway said carefully. "And did she tell you that Mr. Sterling was unsupportive?" "She expressed feelings of isolation and feeling that her concerns were often dismissed or minimized." "So she complained about her husband," Davenport said with a dismissive wave. "As many women do to their therapists. It doesn't mean it's an objective truth." He thought he had scored a point reducing her testimony to mere marital griping, but he had opened a door. Catherine Croft stood for redirect. "Dr. Holloway, you just testified that a lack of spousal support can exacerbate PPA. Can you elaborate on what unsupportive behaviors look like in this context?" "Certainly," the doctor replied. "It can include dismissing the mother's fears, calling her dramatic or crazy, ridiculing her coping mechanisms, threatening her with her diagnosis, or creating an environment where she feels ashamed to have sought help. Behaviors like this, collectively known as gaslighting, can severely worsen the symptoms of anxiety and depression, making the mother feel more isolated and helpless." Dr. Holloway wasn't looking at Jessica or at Davenport. She was looking directly at Robert Sterling. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart describing his exact behavior without ever once breaking confidentiality by saying, "Robert did this." She was describing the textbook, and the textbook was a biography of Robert's cruelty. Robert's confident facade finally cracked. A flush crept up his neck. He shifted in his seat, avoiding the doctor's steady gaze. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Catherine said, sitting down. But she wasn't finished. "The defense calls our rebuttal witness Maria Flores." If Robert's face had flushed before it now turned ashen. He stared, genuinely shocked, as the nanny he had fired and threatened walked confidently to the stand. Maria's testimony was devastatingly simple and utterly credible. She spoke in clear, direct language. She described Jessica's gentle, loving care for Lily. She described Jessica's anxiety but framed it as worry, not malice. Then Catherine asked the crucial question. "Maria, did you ever overhear Mr. Sterling speaking about his wife?" "Yes, many times," Maria said. "Could you give us an example?" "One afternoon, Mrs. Sterling was having a hard day, crying. She was worried about Lily's rash. After she went to lie down, Mr. Sterling was on the phone in his office. He left the door open. I heard him laughing." "What did he say?" Maria took a deep breath. "He said, 'You wouldn't believe the show today. Full-on waterworks over a little diaper rash.' Then he said, 'Just a little longer. Keep building the file. Her little crazy episodes will be our ticket out. Soon the unstable one will be gone, and it will just be you, me, and the baby.'" The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Davenport was on his feet shouting, "Objection, hearsay! It goes to state of mind, Your Honor. It directly corroborates the pattern of behavior described by Dr. Holloway." Catherine retorted, "I'll allow it." Judge Morrison said, his voice grim. He was staring at Robert with an expression of open disgust. "Continue, Ms. Flores." "Who was he talking to?" Catherine asked gently. "I don't know her name," Maria said, "but he called her Sophia." The final piece clicked into place. The affair, the motive. It was never about Lily's safety. It was about Robert wanting to replace Jessica with a new model, and he needed to secure the child and dispose of the mother in the most ruthless way possible to avoid a messy, expensive custody battle. He hadn't just been gaslighting Jessica. He had been plotting her social and maternal execution. Robert Sterling stared at Maria with pure hatred. The mask was gone. The charming, concerned husband had vanished, and in his place was a cornered, vicious man. He had built his case on Jessica's perceived insanity, but in the end, it was his own calculated cruelty that had been laid bare for the court to see. Alistair Davenport's closing argument was a shadow of its opening. The swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt to salvage the wreckage. He tried to paint Maria as a disgruntled ex-employee and Dr. Petrushad Holloway as a biased hired gun, but the narrative had been irrevocably shattered. The carefully constructed image of Robert as the concerned father had been incinerated by the testimony of a nanny and a psychiatrist, who in their different ways spoke the simple truth. When Catherine Croft rose for her closing, she didn't address Davenport's arguments at all. She spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with quiet power. "For 3 days this court has heard a story crafted by Mr. Sterling to depict his wife as a monster. He took the normal, if painful, struggles of a new mother and twisted them into a portrait of madness. He used her vulnerability as a weapon and her cry for help as a confession." She gestured towards Jessica. "What this court has actually seen is a woman of incredible strength, a mother who, in the face of a debilitating medical condition, loved her child so fiercely that she sought help even when her own husband shamed her for it. She did everything a responsible parent is supposed to do. She identified a problem, she consulted a medical expert, and she began treatment. Her actions were not those of an unfit mother. They were the actions of an exemplary one." Then she turned her attention to Robert. "And what did Mr. Sterling do?" "He didn't offer support. He didn't seek to understand. He took notes. He collected evidence. He conspired with his mistress, a woman named Sophia, to build a file so he could discard his wife and take their child. This was never about Lily Sterling's safety. This was about Mr. Sterling's convenience. It was a cold, calculated plot to sidestep a fair custody arrangement by assassinating his wife's character. He is not the protector in this story, Your Honor. He is the villain." She concluded, "We ask the court to see through this charade. We ask that you not only deny Mr. Sterling's outrageous petition, but that you grant Jessica Sterling sole legal and physical custody, ensuring that Lily can be raised by the parent who has proven through her actions to have her child's best interest truly at heart." Judge Morrison listened to it all, his face impassive. When Catherine sat down, he declared a final recess, stating he would deliver his ruling in 1 hour. The hour was the longest of Jessica's life. She sat in the conference room with Catherine and her sister Abigail, who had flown in and sat through the entire ordeal, her hand a constant reassuring presence on Jessica's back. Jessica couldn't speak. She just drank a bottle of water, her hands trembling. All the fight was gone, replaced by a vast, empty expanse of fear. What if the judge didn't see it? What if Robert's performance had been just good enough? When they were called back into the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Robert and Davenport sat at their table, rigid and tense. Robert refused to look at her. Judge Morrison entered, sat, and put on his glasses. He surveyed the room before his eyes settled on Robert. "I have been on this bench for 27 years. The judge began, his voice dangerously low and sharp. "In that time, I have seen my share of contentious custody disputes. But I can say with no hesitation that I have rarely witnessed a more calculated, cruel, and manipulative abuse of the judicial process than that perpetrated by the petitioner, Mr. Robert Sterling." Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Abigail squeezed her shoulder. "Mr. Sterling." The judge continued, his gaze like a physical force. "You came into this court under the guise of a concerned father. But the evidence has shown that you are in fact a man of profound moral depravity. You weaponized your wife's medical condition against her. You systematically gaslit her, documented her suffering not out of concern, but as part of a conspiracy to strip her of her child. Your actions are not just contemptible, they are horrifying." He turned his gaze to Jessica. "Mrs. Sterling, this court is not blind. You have endured an ordeal that would have broken most people. Your courage in seeking help for your postpartum anxiety and OCD is not a sign of weakness. It is a testament to your strength and your profound love for your daughter. You are to be commended, not condemned." The judge's voice boomed through the silent room. "Therefore, the petition for sole custody by Mr. Robert Sterling is denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, this court finds it is in the best interest of the child, Lily Sterling, that sole legal and physical custody be granted to her mother, Jessica Sterling. Mr. Sterling will be granted supervised visitation twice a month at a facility to be determined pending the completion of a court-ordered psychological evaluation and an anger management course. You, sir," he said, locking eyes with Robert one last time, "are the one who is unfit." The gavel fell with a deafening crack. It was over. Tears streamed down Jessica's face as Abigail wrapped her in a fierce hug. Catherine Croft smiled a genuine relieved smile and patted her on the back. Across the room, Robert Sterling sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. His plan, so perfectly architected, had not just failed. It had blown up in his face, leaving him publicly and judicially branded as the monster he truly was. 6 months later. The winter sun cast a pale golden light across the living room floor. The house was different now. The cold, minimalist grays and beiges Robert had insisted upon were gone, replaced with warm colors, soft rugs, and shelves overflowing with board books and colorful toys. It was no longer a showpiece. It was a home. Jessica sat on the floor watching as 16-month-old Lily took a few wobbly, triumphant steps toward her before collapsing into her arms in a fit of giggles. Jessica hugged her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter, a smell of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Her anxiety hadn't vanished overnight. It was still there, a quiet hum in the background where it had once been a deafening roar. She still had her weekly sessions with Dr. Holloway, not as a crisis intervention, but as a form of maintenance, a way to keep herself healthy and strong. She was managing it. She was thriving. She had sold the large, sterile house in the suburbs and used the money to buy this smaller, cozier place in a neighborhood with parks and a strong sense of community. She had reconnected with old friends, the ones Robert had subtly pushed away. Her life was smaller now and infinitely larger all at once. Robert had completed his anger management course. He saw Lily for 2 hours every other Saturday at a sterile visitation center under the watchful eye of a social worker. The report said he was sullen and barely engaged with his daughter. He had fought for a prize, and when he'd lost, he seemed to have lost interest in the prize itself. Jessica had recently heard through the grapevine that Sophia, the other woman, had left him. The grand plan had cost him everything. Sometimes Jessica would feel a flicker of anger at the memory of the trial of the man she had once loved trying to destroy her. But today, sitting here in the sunlight with Lily's happy laughter filling the room, she felt something else. Pity for a man so empty he had to tear others down to feel whole. And gratitude, an overwhelming, all-encompassing gratitude. She had walked through fire, but she had come out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. She had her daughter. She had her life. She had the truth. And it had, against all odds, set her free. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story of betrayal, resilience, and the fight for a mother's right to her child. Jessica's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in our most vulnerable moments, and that seeking help is a sign of courage, not weakness. It's a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried under lies and manipulation, has a way of coming to light. What did you think of Robert's ultimate downfall? Were you cheering when Dr. Holloway took the stand? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more gripping real-life dramas that explore the complexities of the human heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Thanks for listening.